Good evening. The major part of our healing principle has its foundation in a revelation that was given to me in the very earliest years of my practice. And that revelation concerns the origin of evil. When the origin of evil is known, it is very easy to understand how to handle it. Without a knowledge of the nature of error and the origin of all evil, it is a very difficult thing to know how to deal with it. In what is called pure spiritual healing, and this means where an individual has, by the grace of God, received some transcendental experience which enables them to be the instrument for healing without any knowledge of how it's done, without any knowledge of processes, techniques, or treatments. You have quite a different thing than that which we call metaphysical and spiritual healing. The spiritually endowed individual, one who has received a healing gift for some reason that may be known to them or may not be known to them, heals merely by reason of the fact that this Spirit of the Lord God is upon him, and he knows not how healings are accomplished, nor why, and in many cases not even knows why he himself has been chosen to be a healer. This was my own experience. Late 1928, I had an experience while in meditation, and I didn't realize the nature of the experience beyond the fact that after it happened, I could no longer smoke or drink, had no interest in theaters or dancing, cards, any of those things that ordinarily we as humans enjoy as pastimes. All of this disappeared in just one experience. And 2 days after that, I was asked for help. And the day after that, I was asked for help. And then for the next 18 months, I was continuously asked for help by people who had no way of knowing that I had had a religious experience, a spiritual experience. And the result was that very soon after that, I left the business world and became a healer. Now, the healings were beautiful things to witness, but I had no knowledge of how they were taking place. I had no knowledge of why they were taking place, and certainly no knowledge of why I, above all people, should have had that experience. But so it happened. Then, after I was in the work professionally, and patients wanted to know how it happened and why it happened, and couldn't they do likewise, of course I had no explanation and no way of instructing them. And so it was that I began the search for the principles of healing. Now, at that time, I was reading, actually studying, the Christian Science works. But I'll state very openly that I could not understand the principles, couldn't find principles that were workable for me. And therefore, I stayed with the healing work as I understood it. But I did search, and in Mrs. Eddy's writings, I found some very basic principles of spiritual healing. But I did not find that which opened to me this entire subject in such a way that I could now heal and know why and how, but I could also impart it to others. And that is why eventually it was necessary for me to leave the Christian Science movement, and this activity evolved. Now, the very first principle, or among the first principles that came to me in my meditations, had to do with this origin of evil. And I found that a principle that was then in use and still is in use in all of the metaphysical healing movements was actually not correct, and served to act as a barrier to healing more than a help. In other words, whatever healings were done in these movements were really done in spite of this mistake, not because of it. It was because the practitioners themselves rose higher in consciousness than the principle they were working with. And that is this: no person is responsible for their ills. No amount of wrong thinking that an individual does is responsible for their ills. No amount of hate, envy, jealousy, malice, greed, lust, animality, call it what you will, none of that on the part of an individual is responsible for their ills. In other words, to seek for the cause of a person's misfortunes within themselves is to look exactly where it isn't. In other words, it is not you who are responsible for your ills. Now, I'm sure you know that this came to me almost as thunder, because I realized that so many of my practitioner friends were uncovering error in their patients, or were seeking to find what particular wrong thought was producing the ill. In fact, many had lists showing that resentment caused rheumatism, hate and jealousy caused cancer. Oh, you probably are familiar with those lists. There isn't any truth in them. That you can take from me after 30 years of experience in every part of the globe, and with healing works all over the world, and with practitioners who have been developed under this method. There is no use to look to an individual and try to correct them. There is no use looking to an individual to find what particular thought they are thinking that is producing this disease, for the error does not lie within them. This would be perfectly clear to every metaphysician if, instead of blindly accepting what they're taught, they would do a little independent thinking of their own once they begin to heal, and they would soon discover that babies are born with cancers long before they can develop any hate and jealousy, and that babies are born with tuberculosis long before they can become sensual. And loads of children have terrific diseases long before they can commit all of the sins that those lists bear witness to. Also, they could search around among their patients and find many beautiful men and women of beautiful characters and natures, suffering from all these diseases that are supposed to be caused by horrible traits of character. And you'd know that it couldn't be right. They just couldn't be right. Now, it was further revealed that the origin of evil lies in a universal belief in two powers. This is the origin of evil. This is the reason for Adam and Eve being expelled from the Garden of Eden. Just the fact that they accepted a belief in two powers, when as a matter of fact there is only one power, that is spirit. But accepting the belief of two powers, you now have what may be termed a carnal mind or mortal mind. In other words, there is no such thing as a carnal mind or mortal mind. There is a belief in two powers which may be designated as carnal mind or mortal mind, merely as a term. Actually, there is no mortal mind. Actually, there is no carnal mind. There is only one mind, and that mind is the instrument that we were given as an instrument of awareness. It is an instrument given to us for our thinking powers, reasoning powers, learning powers, powers of awareness in any direction. And so the mind plays a very fine function in our lives, but this mind is an unconditioned mind, and therefore the mind itself is never mortal or carnal. It is merely mind. But it takes on the nature of the carnal when we accept the two powers, good and evil. Now remember, it is not the mind that is good and evil. It is our acceptance of two powers that is good and evil. And this belief in two powers operates through the mind so that we think this is evil and this is good. We have been told that there is nothing good or bad. Only thinking makes it so. Only our concept determines whether it is good or bad to us. In and of itself, nothing can be evil. in and of itself, nothing could be good. And it is only as we, by acceptance, place the label of good and evil upon anything, circumstance, or condition, that it becomes so to us. Then what we are dealing with in the healing work is not a person. And for this reason, in the Infinite Way practice, we never take the name of a person into our treatment. We don't ask the name. We are not interested in knowing the name so far as the treatment is concerned. Nor do we know anything about the name of the disease, nor do we wish to hear it, not merely because spiritually and metaphysically it isn't true, but 9 times out of 10 the patient doesn't know even medically whether or not it is true. And so it is that the name of a disease is of no interest to us, or its nature. But remember this first point carefully, that the name of the patient or the identity of the patient does not enter our treatment. At no time is a treatment ever addressed to you. At no time does a treatment say Mrs. Jones or Mr. Smith and so forth and so on. At no time does an Infinite Way treatment ever use the words you, he, she, or it. There is no such thing as addressing a treatment to you or to your cat or to your child or to your parent. There is no such thing as addressing a treatment to a name. To explain that, let me assure you that the moment you ask for help, you have made yourself one with the consciousness of the practitioner. You must always remember that there is an all-knowing intelligence which we call God, and it is God that is doing the work, not man. Therefore, when you ask for help, be assured that the infinite intelligence of this universe knows right where the help is going, and not in the sense of going anywhere, doing anything, or healing anything, merely that because we are governed by a universal intelligence, your contact with the practitioner establishes the contact necessary for your healing. In the same wise, if you ask for help for a member of your family or an animal in your home, a pet, a bird, remember this: since they are in and of your consciousness, when you ask our practitioners for help, you have brought them to that practitioner's consciousness, and so they will receive the benefit. And without the benefit of any names or treatment in the form of suggestion, you are spiritual, or you are well, or you are God's perfect child, all of which is nothing but suggestive therapy. And there is no suggestive therapy in Infinite Way healing work. None of our practitioners is going to suggest to you that you are well, or that you are perfect, or that you are rich. The treatment has nothing to do with you beyond the fact that you were the individual who asked for help, and you will be the one to receive it. But so far as the practitioner is concerned, the treatment has to do purely with the practitioner. And ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. And so if the practitioner knows the truth, the practitioner will make you free. You might ask here from your past experience whether cooperation is necessary. No, cooperation isn't necessary in a general sense. Only in one specific sense it is, and that is, the Master says, do you believe that I can do this? In other words, when you ask for help, first of all, it is assumed that you really want it, that you really believe that you're going to get it, because you are asking someone to go to a lot of trouble and give a lot of time in giving treatment and help to you. It may involve the time necessary for one treatment, or it may involve the time necessary for dozens of treatments. It may involve the time necessary for correspondence or for talk on the telephone. Sometimes when a practitioner does not readily meet a claim, it is necessary for them to spend hours and hours and hours, sometimes sitting up way into the night and sometimes all night, and that is what you are asking for when you ask for help, because you are expecting the practitioner to give the best that they've got to you. And I find this quite unfair if the one asking really hasn't any faith or hope or confidence in what they're asking for, or if they are not taking seriously the fact of the treatment, or merely hoping, well, lightning may strike, forgetting what they have asked of that practitioner. Now, in our work, we have no way of knowing whether a particular case, treatment, claim may be one treatment or 100. And it works in this wise. You ask for help, and the practitioner instantly gives it. Because in our work, practitioners are not permitted to wait 5 minutes before they give the help, or an hour, nor are they permitted to wait until tonight or tomorrow. Every call for help must be given at the very instant of the call, regardless of what the practitioner must lay aside. And no matter whose business or whose meals must be laid aside, the practitioner is required to give the treatment at the very instant of the call for help. And the practitioner does. But it may be 5 minutes later, 50 minutes later, 4 hours later, that the practitioner's mind goes back to that call with a feeling that perhaps it isn't met, or perhaps something further is required. And so that call, that patient, receives another treatment. If the practitioner feels satisfied, there may be no further work done until the next call comes from the patient. But actually, it happens often that this particular patient keeps coming back to mind, sometimes every hour, every 2 hours, or every 4 hours, and the practitioner goes back to work each time. Now, the patient never knows this. The patient is never told this. And so the patient may believe that the healing has taken place in just one treatment, and as a rule will never learn differently. Because when the patient has turned to the practitioner, the problem rests with the practitioner to work out in their own consciousness. And whether it takes a day or whether it takes 20 treatments in a day, the work must be continued as long as the patient requests it. Once the patient feels that the work is not done, and progress is not being made, they have the privilege of stopping the work. But the practitioner must continue until they are released from the case. And so you see what it involves to ask a practitioner for help. And therefore the part that the patient must play is certainly a feeling of confidence, assurance that help does lie in this direction. Naturally, those who are not too ill to be completely incapacitated will read or meditate themselves, will make some effort within themselves if they have any knowledge of truth, but that is purely an activity of their own. The major responsibility lies with the practitioner as long as the patient continues to make contact. And that doesn't mean that the practitioner is responsible to bring out a healing, for that no one knows. There are so many different things involved in every case that no one can give any guarantees as to whether a healing is going to take place or not. Now, the practitioner's first responsibility when receiving this call is to know this, that this, call it error, evil, sin, disease, whatever it may be, appearance, claim, is impersonal. It has nothing to do with the person who called for help. And it is impersonal in the sense that its source is not in person, its source is in what we will call the carnal mind or mortal mind, that which is not a mind but rather a belief in two powers. Now, this realization alone takes care of more than half of all the healing work that's done without anything further than that. Just the separating of the claim from the person, just relieving the person of the responsibility of being responsible for their own ill. Forgiving. It's a sense of forgiving when you realize that no individual is responsible for their sins. They are victims of sin, but they're not responsible for it. The responsibility lies in the acceptance of two powers. And since one with God is a majority, as soon as the practitioner knows that there are not two powers operating, the patient responds. Wherever there is receptivity, the patient will respond. I want to show you how far-reaching this is. We speak of God as one. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. And we speak of God as the one mind, or the one power, the one law. And then we turn around and yield ourselves to material laws and mental laws and give them power. Having first of all acknowledged God as one, we then turn around and deny it by saying, ah yes, but. And with that but, we're in the frying pan. To abide steadfastly in the conviction that God is one does this for you. And watch what this does not only for you, but for your patient. God is the one lawgiver. Therefore, all law that emanates from God must be spiritual law. Then if God is one, and if God is the only lawgiver, and God is spirit, and the only law is spiritual law, what becomes of the material law of infection and contagion, germ theory? What becomes of all of the material laws of weather, of climate? What becomes of all the mental laws of malpractice, all the mental laws that infest humanity? Well, now watch this. They do not operate in the consciousness of an individual who has taken his stand for one. The moment an individual accepts for himself God is one, God is the one and only lawgiver, and God is good. Therefore, all law must be spiritual if God is spirit. All law must be good if God is good. And so we have no evil laws, we have no erroneous laws, we have no material laws, and we have no mental laws. But remember this only becomes true in the consciousness of the individual living and working from the standpoint of one. So far as human consciousness is concerned, material laws will operate and mental laws will operate. And they will operate both for good and for evil, because the material realm is one of good and evil, and the mental realm is one of good and evil, and neither of these have to do with God. Therefore, while you are functioning under material and mental law, you are separate and apart from the law of God. And you are not under the law of God, neither indeed can be. You only bring yourself under the law of God when you acknowledge God as one. And when you acknowledge that since there can be but one lawgiver, there can be but one law, and now we have no law of disease. Please don't be like some of our unthinking metaphysicians who go around telling all of their friends and neighbors that there is no disease. Don't tell them that I said there is no law of disease. They'll laugh at us, and we don't like to be laughed at. But they would be justified in it just the same. There are material laws and there are mental laws, and they operate in the consciousness of everyone who accepts two powers. The only time they stop functioning is when they touch the consciousness of an individual who lives, works, treats under the one law. Now, in this same way, when you are functioning, living in this consciousness, that is when you can go to the bedside of those who have infectious diseases or contagious diseases and not walk out with any of them. That is when you can walk through a depression and find that your income is not curtailed, because you are no longer living under the physical or mental laws of supply. You have removed yourself and have brought yourself under the spiritual law of supply. And the spiritual law of supply is omnipresence. Where God is, fulfillment is. Wherever God is, infinity is. And the moment that you acknowledge that the place whereon I stand is holy ground, Son, thou art ever with me, and all that I have is thine, the moment you acknowledge your oneness with God and your life under spiritual law, these laws of economics, these laws of matter or mind in the realm of economy, do not operate in your experience. Or, more accurately, let me say, they operate less and less and less. It is true that as long as we are on earth, the laws of good and evil operate to some extent in the consciousness of everyone. There is no record yet on earth of anyone having completely transcended the laws of matter or mind while they were in the flesh. The outstanding example of that, of course, is the experience of Jesus Christ. When he returns from the tomb, he is still showing forth the marks of the nails and of the sword, showing that his body was still responding to material law and material power. It is only at the ascension, when he rises above all material and mental law and shows forth the pure body of spirit, untouched by sword, untouched by nails, untouched by hatred, untouched by bigotry. So it is that in a day of ascension, we probably will rise completely to where no material or mental law can touch us. But again, speaking of these 30 years' experience, I have never known anyone who sometime or other hasn't been affected by some laws of matter or mind. Fortunately, only temporarily, because there is recourse to the law of spirit, the law of God, the one and only real law. Now, you find then that whether you are being presented with claims of sin, false appetite, disease, lack, limitation, unemployment, unhappy marriages, whether you are being confronted with unnatural phases of weather, whether you are confronted with cases of capital and labor, management and unions, all of these respond. It makes no difference what the degree. All of these respond to the realization that there are no evil people, and that the evil in men's minds is not power, because it isn't personal, and because it has not its rise in God. Now here you come to a very important point. All that emanates from God is spiritual. Therefore, it is neither good nor evil. It is just pure being. When you say a thing is good, remember that there are degrees of good. Or when you speak of anything as good, you're speaking of it in contradistinction to that which is evil. In other words, you're speaking of a pair of opposites. But in God, there are no opposites. And that you must remember. You have heard of God and Satan. And probably in some form of religion, you may even have been taught that Satan is a power, and that Satan is warring against God. And that is as ludicrous as Paul's statement that the carnal mind is enmity against God. When you are dealing with God, deal with omnipotence. And then see if there are any other powers. whether you call it devil or Satan or mortal mind. Deal with God as omnipotent, and you will no longer have to battle error in any form. You will not have to war with sin or sinners. You will not have to war with disease. You will not have to take up any mental weapons. You will stand fast in omnipotence. And omnipotence means all. All power means there is no other power. Therefore, when confronted with a Satan in any form, devil, carnal mind, mortal mind, the instantaneous response must be this: in the face of omnipotence, there is no other power. And then stand fast. Stand ye still and see the salvation of the Lord, of the one power. Until you become imbued with an absolute conviction in omnipotence, you will not make rapid progress in spiritual healing. Because spiritual healing is not using one power over another. It is not turning to God to ask God to do something for somebody. It is more like the master looking at the crippled man and saying, "What did hinder you?" He didn't turn to God for help. You never heard of the master turning to God for help for any case, including death. At no point did he turn to God for help. His answer always was, "What did hinder you?" or "Open thine eyes," or "Here, let me put some spittle on it," as if spittle had power. Oh no. Spiritual healing has nothing to do with using a spiritual power. It has nothing to do with using God. It has nothing to do with using truth. In our work, we are dealing with God as one, with no opposite. We are dealing with God as omnipotent, with no power to contend against. We are dealing with omnipresence, which means that there is no presence in this room except the presence of God. Do my physical eyes see the presence of God? No. My physical eyes see men and women and children. Some good, some bad, some old, some young, some sick, some well. But with this inner eye, which has been opened, with this inner spiritual discernment, I know that God is omnipresent, and that means all present. And there is no one in this room except God made evident, God made manifest. Everybody else may think of themselves as the devil if they like. They may think of themselves as sick or dying, but it doesn't change the basic truth that there cannot be God, an omnipotence and an omnipresence, and there be mortality. Oh no. No, we are dealing with what the Hindus call Maya, and what the metaphysical movements call illusion. When we look out and behold a world of men and women of various ages and various states of health and wealth, but the illusion is not out here. The illusion isn't sitting out in this room. You are not the illusion, individually or collectively. God has expressed himself as individual you and me. God's life is the only life you have. God's mind is the only mind you have. God's soul is the only soul you have. God's spirit is the substance of your being and of your body. And if I do not behold that, the illusion is up here in my mind. Now, India could become the greatest nation on the face of the earth in 5 years. It would only take 5 years to make India the greatest nation on the face of the earth, because they have developed their spiritual life to the extent where, with the correction of one mistake, they would come into their divine heritage. If only they could see that an illusion cannot be externalized. The only reason they are careless and indifferent about this world, about even their own bodies. Oh, what difference this disease? In a few years we'll bury it and I'll be fine. It's only an illusion. That's not true. If you go on a desert and see a mirage, rest assured the mirage is not out on the desert, it's in you. It is in your misperception. There never has been an externalized mirage. A mirage is always a false activity of the mind, a misperception of the mind. And for this reason, there is no sin or disease or death in you. This is a misperception of the universal mind that believes in good and evil, and as long as it believes in good and evil, it will continue to witness sin, disease, death, lack, and limitation. You prove this by degrees. You cannot overcome the belief of good and evil between now and tomorrow morning. Even though intellectually, some of you at least will agree with every word I've said, you feel the rightness of it, that doesn't mean you'll demonstrate it. Not yet. As you live with it, as it begins to change your consciousness, as you find yourself fearing less the microbes and the germs, as you find yourself fearing less the weather and the climate, as you find yourself fearing less the Russians and the bombs, you will then be demonstrating more of harmony, because in some measure you will have overcome the belief in two powers. Now, even though this revealed itself to me in one day, believe me, it took several years before the full light of it dawned on me, and I don't mean the full ultimate light. That is still to come. But enough of the light so that life could be lived from an entirely different standpoint, without any fear of anything in the external world, without any fear of anyone in the external world, without fear of any power in the external world. Now, this involves a change of consciousness. You have to be renewed by a change of consciousness. You have to be transformed by the renewing of the mind. You have to begin at a specific time in your life to accept a principle of life, and then to live by it and apply it to every circumstance that comes into your experience. Just taking two, whenever you behold evil of any nature in a person, physical, mental, moral, or financial, if you will make it your business to instantly declare, this has nothing to do with person, this is mortal mind, and therefore it has no existence. If it doesn't come from God, it doesn't exist. God made all that was made, and he looked upon it and found it good. Therefore, all that God made is good. And so if I am looking out and beholding something that does not appear to be good to me, it is an illusion. And the illusion isn't out there. The illusion is up here in my misperception. So I do not correct it by saying, oh, you ought to be more honest. Oh, you ought to be more loving. Or you ought to be more grateful. Oh, no, I do not correct the illusion out there. I correct within myself the belief that there is any such thing as ingratitude, injustice, immorality, poverty, whatnot. Always the correction comes within me so that my consciousness becomes transformed and I can thereby see, not through a glass darkly, but face to face. Humanly we see through a glass darkly. Spiritually we see face to face. We behold him as he is, and we are satisfied with this likeness. Remember, he is already is. He is already as he is. But now, spiritually, we behold him as he is, and we are satisfied with this likeness. Then, with everything that impinges itself upon your consciousness, that has the nature of good and evil, you instantaneously must realize, no, nothing is good or bad. All that is spiritual. All that is infinite and eternal, without qualities, even without quantities, since infinity is not a quantity. Infinity is allness. Eternality is not time. Eternality is beyond time. Infinity is beyond amount. Omnipotence is beyond comparison or degree. Therefore, as you, within your own consciousness, realize omnipotence is the law, there is but one power, you will find that this change takes place in you. You won't start to use your mind to overcome something or change something or heal or correct something, and then you'll be on the spiritual path. The very moment you can restrain your mind from trying to correct somebody or something, some person or some condition, and within yourself say, no, 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 omnipotence is the law, omnipresence is the law, allness is the law. All the rest is illusion, mortal mind, nothingness. You'll find how quickly you'll begin to heal. But there must be a cessation of this activity, which is always seeking to correct someone, reform someone, improve someone, do something to someone or for someone. Whereas the mind should be still and know that I am God. Whether I is Joel, or I is Mary, or I is Jim, I is still God. Whether I is appearing as me, or I is appearing as you, I is still God, and God in the midst of me, you, he, she. This one infinite God is about its business, and any illusion, any discord, any inharmony isn't out there. It is in my misperception of what is out there. And one with God is a majority, and that one becomes a healer. The very moment that an individual can say, what did hinder you, without trying to reach out there and make it so, the very moment an individual can say, God is, and not try to give a treatment to somebody out there to improve them, that very moment they are on the path of spiritual healing. The whole secret lies in making the mind behave. Make that mind behave so that it isn't trying to reform someone, correct someone, heal someone, improve someone, change someone, so that the mind can be still and let you look out and behold God's image and likeness. everywhere, at all times. And you will see that the erroneous appearances that hit up against your consciousness will dissolve, and that will be called a healing. Like the woman who pressed through the throng and touched the hem of the robe. The master didn't have to know she was there. He didn't have to know her name. He didn't have to know her disease. Why? He was living in the consciousness of omnipresence and omnipotence. And anything that touched up against that consciousness had to drop dead. Not the woman, but the disease. It worked a different way with Sapphira and Nicodemus. Unfortunately, there is such a thing as spiritual wickedness in high places. Ordinarily, there is no such thing as sin in an individual because they are victims, ignorant victims, of this belief in two powers. And so no blame attaches to anyone for their sin, not even the woman taken in adultery. No blame attaches to her. She was just a victim of the ignorant belief that there are two powers, and she was seeking satisfaction in one of those powers. Now, in the case of Nicodemus and Sapphira, it is quite different. They had already learned the truth about God, and so when they started to steal, withhold, they really and truly were violating a law that they consciously knew about. And they were bringing themselves into violation. Oh, I know, some of you don't know what I'm talking about. After the crucifixion of the Master, the disciples formed a communist society. They took everything they had and put it into one pool. And they lived together and lived from this one source because they were being persecuted by the church. And so they couldn't go about their ordinary business. They couldn't earn money. They couldn't be seen very much in public. And so they hid and pooled their resources and decided that everyone would be fed and clothed and housed from this one source. And so each one was invited to put their all into this pool. And two of the disciples of the Master, or followers of the Master, Nicodemus and Sapphira, came to put their all in the pool, but they kept out a little of it in their back pocket where nobody was supposed to know they had it. And Peter discerned this. Peter could see what was happening, and so he said, "You have not done this unto me, you have done this unto God." And they both dropped dead. In other words, the very moment that they came into conflict with the law of God itself, they were in trouble. The story tells us it was a physical death, and it may have been or it may not. But the story, whether it was physical death or a momentary shock, makes no difference. The point is this, that when you violate a spiritual law, something has to happen. Or, on the other hand, when you come to a spiritual law and bring something to it that is antagonistic to the Spirit, it has to drop dead. And so it is that a disease or a sin or a false appetite, when it is brought to the spiritual law, it must end.